Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It is good to be here. And we have a massive topic today.
We really do.
Hmm.
We're looking at maybe the ultimate question, the one that keeps philosophers and, let's be honest, a lot of us up at night.
A big one.
Is the origin of life just a happy chemical accident? A cosmic lottery win? Or is it chemically impossible without some kind of designer?
It's really the heavyweight championship of worldviews, isn't it? In one corner, you have the atheistic materialist view that says, look, give the universe enough time, enough chance.
And it'll just happen.
Dead chemicals will eventually, stumble into a living cell. But then in the other corner, you have hard chemistry. And it's arguing that, wait a minute, the universe seems to imply a creator because molecules just don't work the way materialists need them to.
And we are not just talking philosophy here. We're going to get into some serious concepts today, things like chirality and investigator interference.
They sound technical, I know.
They do, but as we're going to see, they pretty much dismantle the whole idea of life just starting by itself.
And we're basing this whole deep dive on a really fascinating discussion between Dr. Stephen Meyer, a philosopher of science, and Dr. James Tour. He's a world-renowned synthetic organic chemist.
And the stakes here are they're huge. If what Tour is saying is right, the whole scientific foundation for a strictly materialist universe just crumbles.
Exactly. And just to set the scene, Tour is not some critic on the sidelines.
Not at all. I looked him up. He's a top 50 scientist globally. We're talking over 600 peer-reviewed papers, 150 patents. The man knows how to build molecules.
He knows how to build them better than almost anyone on the planet. So if anyone knows just how hard it is to make matter do anything specific, it's him.
Okay, so before we dive into the molecular details, I just have a quick request for you listening. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It honestly helps us a ton to get this out to more people.
It really does.
All right, so let's set the scene. Why is a scientist of James Tour's status, a nanotechnology expert, spending his time arguing with a YouTuber?
It does seem like a mismatch, right? Like a world champion boxer stepping into the ring with a heckler from the audience.
Right.
And the source material lays out this conflict. It's between Dr. Tour and a popular YouTube blogger who goes by Professor Dave Farina.
And Farina, he's a science communicator, not a working research scientist, correct?
That's right. And those worlds don't usually clash so publicly. But Tour explains his reason in the discussion with Meyer. He said it wasn't about ego. It was about scientific integrity.
Okay.
Farina put out a video attacking Tour's character, and according to Tour, every single scientific slide that Farina showed was just wrong.
Wait, every single slide. That sounds statistically improbable.
That was Tour's claim. He said the chemistry was just fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
And he felt he had a duty to, straighten this out for the public. He didn't want this misinformation out there. So he made a 13-part video series, just taking it all apart.
13 parts. Wow.
Yeah.
That's commitment. But I want to be super clear on the topic here because I think this gets confused all the time. We are not talking about biological evolution.
No, absolutely not.
Not Darwin, not how a monkey becomes a man or a fish becomes a lizard.
That's a crucial distinction. Tour is focused like a laser on abiogenesis. Chemical evolution.
Getting life from non-life.
Exactly. Biological evolution is about how life changes once you already have it. It needs reproduction, mutation, selection.
But you can't have a mutation if you don't have a life form to begin with.
You got it. Abiogenesis asks the much, much harder question. How do you get the very first living cell from a bunch of dead chemicals, from rocks and water? Darwin had nothing to say about that. And that's where the atheistic worldview really faces its biggest chemical hurdle.
So, okay, before we can figure out how life started, we probably need to agree on what life even is. Because from the source, it seems like that goalpost moves around a lot.
Oh, it does. Tour and Meyer go deep on this. If you ask a materialist who's trying to defend the it happened by accident view, they might try to define life down to just, say, a self-replicating molecule.
But Tour says that's nonsense.
Complete nonsense. To have a living cell, the most basic unit of life we know, you need at least 4 things all working together at the same time.
Okay, lay them out for us. What's the checklist?
First, you need a membrane, a casing. You have to separate the inside from the outside, otherwise all your chemistry just floats away.
Makes sense. A container?
Second, information storage. That's your DNA or RNA.
The blueprint.
Code. Right. Third, you need metabolic machinery, an engine basically to process energy and keep the lights on. And fourth, you need the 4 specific classes of chemicals: amino acids, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids.
So it's not just some blob of slime.
Not even close. Tour loves the analogy of a factory. Life is a functioning system. It has homeostasis. It actively regulates its own internal environment.
I like that factory analogy. You can't just throw a pile of bricks, copper wire, and some glass in a field and expect a factory to pop up. You need blueprints, machines, walls, a power source, all at once.
And if you just have the bricks, you just have a pile of bricks.
Exactly.
And that gets to a philosophical point Meyer makes. Materialists often try to define life down to make it easier to explain. They'll say, well, maybe the first life was just a simple RNA strand. But Tour argues you can't escape the reality of the cell. It's a complex information processing machine. If you can't build the factory, you haven't explained life.
This is where it gets really, really interesting and honestly a bit scandalous for the scientific community. Dr. Tour flat out accuses origin of life researchers of cheating.
It's a strong word, but chemically, it's accurate. He calls it investigator interference.
Which means the scientists are doing the work that nature is supposed to be doing on its own, right?
Precisely. In these experiments, you have a team of brilliant PhDs in lab coats standing over a beaker, controlling the temperature, the pressure, the timing.
But nature doesn't have a chemist.
Nature doesn't have a chemist standing over a primordial pond.
And the source gave some wild examples of this, like scientists will buy purified chemicals from a biological supply company to start their natural experiment.
That is the #1 cheat. If you're trying to prove life can emerge without a designer, you can't start with chemicals that were already made and purified by a biological source or a modern factory. He brings up ribose.
That's the sugar in RNA, isn't it?
Yep, the R in RNA, it's essential. But you cannot make pure ribose in any plausible early Earth scenario. It is incredibly unstable. It falls apart. If you try to cook it up in a prebiotic soup, it just turns into this brown tar.
So they just skip the hardest part. They don't make the brick, they just buy the brick off the shelf.
They buy the brick, and it gets worse. When they run these reactions, they almost always get a mess of side products, a gunk. Tour calls it a melanoidin sludge.
It's appetizing.
In a real pond, that sludge would gum up the works and stop everything. But in the lab,
Let me guess. They clean it up.
they pull out their advanced machines, like an HPLC, high-performance liquid chromatography. They use it to isolate the tiny, tiny fraction of the chemical they actually wanted, and they just throw away all the garbage.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Isn't that just good science? You isolate variables, you purify things to see if a reaction is possible.
That's a fair question, but here is the critical distinction. They aren't trying to prove a reaction is possible in a modern lab. They are trying to prove it happened on a chaotic, messy Earth 4 billion years ago.
Ah.
By using an HPLC, they are giving the early Earth the capabilities of a billion-dollar state-of-the-art laboratory. That's the investigator interference.
So they're using their own intelligence at every single step to try and prove that no intelligence was needed in the first place.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Tour says the irony is just overwhelming. They say, look what nature did, but what they really mean is, look what a team of PhDs with decades of training and advanced equipment did. It completely undermines the "it just happens by chance" argument.
And even with all that cheating, they still hit this enormous wall.
Let's talk about the left-handed problem. This concept blew my mind. Chirality.
This is probably one of the strongest chemical arguments against abiogenesis. And chirality just comes from the Greek word for hand.
Okay, so like my left hand and my right hand.
Exactly. A lot of life's molecules, especially amino acids and sugars, come in mirror image forms.
Right.
A left-handed version and a right-handed version. They have the same atoms, same weight, same boiling point, but they're mirror images you can't superimpose.
Like trying to put a left-handed glove on your right hand, it just doesn't work.
Perfect analogy. And here's the rule of life. It is incredibly obsessively picky. Biology demands 100% purity. It's called homochirality.
So what does that mean in practice?
All proteins, the little machines that do all the work in your cells, are built exclusively from left-handed amino acids. And your DNA and RNA, they're built exclusively from right-handed sugars.
What happens if you mix them up, if a wrong-handed one gets in? The whole thing breaks. If you're building a protein and you stick a single right-handed amino acid in that chain of left-handed ones, it won't fold correctly into its 3D shape. It's useless junk.
Okay, so if I'm a warm little pond 4 billion years ago, and I somehow managed to make some amino acids, What kind do I get?
In any natural chemical reaction without a chemist intervening, you always get a 50-50 mix. It's called a racemic mixture. 50% left, 50% right, every single time.
And that's the showstopper for accidental life.
It's a colossal barrier. Tour throws down the gauntlet to the scientific community on this. He says nobody has ever created a 100% pure homochral mixture under plausible prebiotic conditions. Nature makes random mixtures. Life demands absolute purity.
I have heard the counter argument, though. Someone will say, well, maybe it was just a lucky coin toss. Maybe you just happened to get a string of all Fs.
Okay, but let's think about the math on that. A small protein might need, say, 150 amino acids. All of them have to be left-handed. That's like flipping a coin 150 times and having it land on heads every single time. The odds are so astronomically small, they're effectively zero.
And that's for just one tiny protein. A cell needs thousands of them.
Exactly. And even that analogy is too generous because the chemistry itself fights you. But this is where we get to the really new science the source talks about, what Tour calls the final nail in the coffin.
Yes, the esoteric point that Dave Farina, the YouTuber, tried to just dismiss. CISS, chiral-induced spin selectivity. It sounds like something out of Star Trek.
It does. It sounds like total technobabble. But it's actually cutting-edge physics from work by Ron Naiman at the Weizmann Institute. Farina waved it away, but Tour says, no, this is absolutely fundamental.
Okay, so break it down for us. What is CISS?
All right, so think about electrons moving through a molecule. We used to picture it like water flowing through a pipe. But it turns out for these biological molecules to work for DNA to repair itself, for proteins to shuttle energy, the electrons have to be spun a certain way.
Spun, like a top.
Sort of. It's a quantum property. Spin up or spin down. The molecules themselves act like tiny little spin valves or filters.
So like a filter that only lets through electrons that are spinning clockwise, for example.
That's a great way to put it. And this flow of spin-polarized electrons is essential for life's chemistry to happen. But here's the kicker.
Okay.
This whole spin filtering process only works if the chirality, the handedness of the molecule, is already 100% perfect from the very beginning.
Whoa. Okay, why is that so important for this whole God versus chance debate?
Because the standard evolutionary story for abiogenesis was always something like, well, maybe life started out messy.
Right.
Maybe it had a mix of left and right hands, and then over millions of years, it slowly purified itself. It evolved toward perfection.
A fake it till you make it model of early life.
Exactly. But the physics of CISS just says, no, that's impossible. Without perfect purity at the very start, the electrons don't move correctly, the basic chemistry of life doesn't function, the cell would be dead on arrival. Or rather, it would never be alive in the first place.
So you can't evolve into purity if the machinery needs purity just to turn on.
Bingo. You can't evolve the engine if the engine won't even start.
That's a heavy idea.
Yeah.
It implies the whole setup had to be deliberate from step one. It's a binary. It's either perfect instantly or it's dead forever.
And that points very, very strongly away from a gradual, random, chance-based process, and it points toward a specific, instantaneous setup, which, to many, looks a lot like design.
So when we step back and we look at the two worldviews, on one side you've got the materialist view, and Tour's argument is that this view is propped up by redefining life to be simpler than it is, and then cheating in the lab.
And then on the other side, you just have the chemistry itself.
Yeah.
And what Tour and Meyer are arguing is that the actual hardware of life requires things that nature on its own just cannot provide.
It requires a purity that nature doesn't make.
An isolation of chemicals that nature doesn't allow, and fundamentally, it requires a plan, an arrangement.
Stephen Meyer had this great line in the source material. He said, "Beware the sound of one hand clapping."
I love that quote. It means you have to hear the critique to really judge the theory.
Right. If you only ever hear the simple textbook story, life arose from a primordial soup. It sounds kind of plausible. It's a nice, simple story. It fits the atheistic narrative.
But when you hear the critique from a synthetic chemist, someone who actually builds molecules for a living, you suddenly realize that story has massive gaping holes in it. The textbook is skipping all the hard chapters.
And the implication is that the evidence, as it stands right now, points toward an external intelligence. Not because of faith, not as a God of the gaps, but because of what we actually know about how chemistry works.
It completely shifts the burden of proof. It's no longer good enough to just say, oh, we haven't figured it out yet, just give us more time. The argument is now that the known laws of physics and chemistry seem to actively forbid this from happening by accident.
So where does all this leave us?
It leaves us looking at the cell not as some simple glob of protoplasm, but as a piece of technology, a factory that far surpasses anything humans have ever engineered.
We've covered a ton here. The definition of life, the cheating, the left-handed problem, electron spin. It really forces you to rethink that standard story we're all told.
It definitely does. It's a powerful reminder that following the science doesn't always lead where you think it will. Sometimes it leads you right away from materialism.
And I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought to chew on. We talked about how scientists have to intervene at every step to make these reactions work. The whole irony of investigator interference.
The ultimate irony.
So here it is. If the smartest chemists in the world, using the most advanced equipment, supercomputers, and 150 years of accumulated knowledge, cannot synthesize the basic building blocks of life without cheating, why do we have so much faith that a blind, mindless rock did it by accident 4 billion years ago?
That really is the ultimate question.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.